Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the CAANZ Practice Power Up 2021 conference. My name's Shay Thai, FCA Director of Sales APAC at Mindbridge, and I'll be your chair for this afternoon's session, Modern Day Advisory Services Moving Beyond a Client-Led Model with Darren Van Zyl, partner at Enterprise Elements. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce Darren Van Zyl, partner at Elements Advisory Group. Darren is a partner, as I said, at Enterprise Elements, where he and his team provide high-value advisory services that help their clients navigate the challenges and successes of their business journey from startup to exit. Darren is a CA, public practitioner and business valuation specialist with the CAANZ and has been a partner in Enterprise Elements for the last 8 years. Darren has presented on a number of topics at CAANZ events across the business valuation and advisory services networks, and is also a contributor to Advisable, the Fathom Advisor Network. So please join me in welcoming Darren.
Thanks very much, Shay. I'm just going to share my screen to get us started. Okay. Well, thanks very much. It's a real privilege to be presenting at this conference. As I said, I'm a partner in Enterprise Elements, and we are quite a significant user of Fathom. The good news is that we aren't here today to actually sell software. We're not here to talk about pricing and things like that. I'm actually here today to talk about how we've actually embedded it into our model, which I think is a really important aspect of utilization of software within the CANZ network. Over the years, I've developed a real passion for seeing our industry migrate towards integration of more advisory services. And we've found that over the years, we've really been successful in implementing that. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about first of all, our journey. Okay. So just to give you some context, our Enterprise Elements, our practice, we were a little bit different in our implementation and startup. We actually launched our advisory business, with no traditional compliance clients or compliance services clients in 2013. And what we noticed and really saw, we really set out to develop a boutique and structured advisory services model. And throughout that time, as I'm sure you've all seen as well, the advisory services conversation is becoming more and more prevalent and integrated into accounting practices. So it was really quite interesting for us because we really almost needed to unlearn the traditional accounting services model. My background in audit and compliance and tax, in a sense, we had to unlearn some of those services models and rethink the way we do things. And that was really important because at the same time, we really saw that a number of other practices, our colleagues, were also really struggling with the rollout and the development of this new advisory services model. And so when we really think about it, and we sat down our partner group and we thought about what are some of the distinguishing features about what's been successful for us. One of the really key factors that we believe is that we were able to really take the lead and develop what we call an advisor-led model. Okay, so in discussions with Fathom, being quite a large user of Fathom, and also in conversations with the Institute, we were asked to really share some of these thoughts on what has worked for our firm. This isn't a mandated service offering that we're asking you to buy into. My interest today is to really share those thoughts about what's worked in the hope that we can raise awareness and also hopefully that you can take some items away and really build on what we've been able to do in our offering. Okay. So in terms of the agenda and learning outcomes today, it's really important that you might say, well, what's the opposite? What's the difference between an advisor-led model and how does it actually work? Well, the first step is actually looking at what we call the opposite, which is actually client-led advisory model, which I think hopefully as we talk through today, you'll notice some of you might have actually been in the process of developing your model, and we can hopefully identify the features of what that looks like and also some of the shortcomings of that model, because we've seen it. We've also made some mistakes in the way we've done things, and we've built on that. But we want to share those shortcomings, but then also help you understand, what do I see, or how do we see an advisor-led advisory model? So what are the features, and how has Enterprise Elements actually built that model and actually applied some of this content? So I really want to help you move beyond the textbook, you know, simple, advisory services type conversation, and help you see practically, share some IP about how did we actually do it and what has worked really well for us. We're also going to talk about promotion of an advisor led model, because that is one of the critical parts, as I'm sure you would agree. There is a need to promote advisory services in a different way to traditional tax and compliance services. So we're going to talk about really what is the strategy behind how we do that. And then finally, how has this been a major catalyst for growth in our firm? We have a number of other arms to our business, a number of other divisions. And this model has been powerful for us because it's actually been a catalyst for growing other services as well. So then we're going to allow for some Q&A time at the end. So Shade, if it's okay, I might just see how the poll results have come through as of yet.
So we had just over 50 responses. So 23% of our friends that have dialed in today said yes, they have been successful. That's awesome. We had 34% said no. So maybe we've got an opportunity there to impart some knowledge today, Darren. And 43% said not sure.
Very good. Well, that's great. That's actually a fantastic, almost a perfect split of participants today. So that's great. So I'm really confident that we'll be able to share something with you that is something that you can either adapt into your model if you've already embarked down this journey, something that you can incorporate into the design of the model that you may look to implement, but also then, even if you haven't set about this direction, what might you need to be mindful of if you were to venture down as part of the strategy for your practice. So let's start off with a conversation about what is client-led advisory services and how do we identify it? I think obviously a third of the room says, well, we're not sure. So the things that we see out there that, again, this is a combination of areas that we've perhaps made some mistakes over the last 8 years and probably observed and tweaked in our model. But the first one is that, as it is a common word in the industry, in our world, that one of the common identifiers is that advisory services on the client-led nature is very reactive. So what we mean by that is that really we only provide that service when the client requests it. And it's really, what that means is that we really have to scramble quite quickly and, react to what they're asking us to do. But as we'll see some of the other features, that does have some issues and creates some problems. The next one is that what we really see across, you might be thinking, well, is advisory services perhaps where I refer my clients into different software packages? We've all heard about Fathom today, and we'll talk about it in a moment in a little bit more detail. But a lot of client-led services will really have some sort of aspect of, well, clients ask me for a software package to help analyze their numbers. So I think I'm just going to push it to them. I'm going to refer them. I might even set them up with the software, but ultimately I'm going to let them do all the work, and I'm not going to incorporate it into my services. So that's a really important aspect. And so what we end up with, the combination of those two, is that there are, one of the identifiers is that some of those interactions with the client is very much infrequent. So the issue there is that when we have unplanned, sporadic advisory engagements, it makes capacity planning really difficult. So quite often, as I said, we're scrambling to put together the advisory, the engagement. We don't quite really contain it perhaps into proper boundaries, etc. So that infrequency does cause some issues. And finally, then, one of the other identifiers is that it traditionally has non-uniform engagements. So we may have one client or two clients from the same industry, asking for a similar service, but ultimately, if we reflect on what we've delivered in the past, it's actually not the same engagement. We haven't delivered it in a consistent manner, and the outcomes that the client might have actually experienced are quite different. Okay, so hopefully you're gaining a bit of understanding of this is a more of a client-led model, and it really does come with it some things you might be saying, well, look, what sort of conversations might I be hearing from my clients that would indicate that I have more of a client-led advisory service than an advisor-led service? One of the really common statements or questions that you might have heard of. It's very topical right now with a lot of clients really looking at their funding. The banks are putting a lot of pressure on clients to provide feedback on their operating position and their performance. And then I'd be saying, well, we need to see a three-way budget. And so the client ultimately doesn't know what that is. And the client comes to us and says, well, the bank's asked for it, so can you produce it for me? And so you can probably see that's a very much a reactive request. It's also probably shows that maybe the client undervalues what a three-way budget actually can provide them with. And so by just giving them that quick three-way budget, we may be missing a wider conversation that we need to have with the client. Another question might be, well, I need to bring on some staff, but we're not sure if we can afford it. So could you maybe just help me do some calcs and understand whether we can afford it? Again, a great question to receive from the client, but if we react straight away and just simply help them with a small, type break-even type calculation that says, well, our incremental sales need to increase by $50,000 if we bring on this person. Again, we could miss a much wider conversation on these advisory areas that ultimately we found the client really values. You might hear things like, well, can you do up a few KPIs for me to actually monitor each month? Again, a great request, but we might feel the compulsion to just push something like Fathom to them and actually say, well, here, use Fathom for yourself. You can build some KPIs there and see how you go. Again, these are very much strong indicators of a client-led advisory service. So the issue that we have is that there are some significant shortcomings with this model. And what I'd really like to take you through is the cause and effect. What I believe the reason is for a lot of practices that might actually be shipwrecking their advisory services strategy and saying, well, look, we're just not getting the momentum that we need. These are some of the shortcomings of this client-led model. The first one is that ultimately, as I said before, there is a lack of structure behind what they are actually delivering. So the more non-uniform, the more infrequent those engagements, the less structure, the less time we have to actually develop process and structure, which really means, I think, one of the real challenges, and I experienced this coming up through my experience and background, was that makes it very difficult to train new talent. And that is the number one thing that if maybe perhaps advisory services to you has been seen as something that is only done at a partner level, well, that makes it very difficult to actually bring on the new generation of advisors and train them up. And ultimately, what that really means is that advisory services of this nature is heavily reliant on partners for delivery. Now, that is a number of problems, because if partners are the only ones that are able to deliver this service, and perhaps by delivery, I obviously partners would be the ones facing the client, but by delivery, what I also mean is the back end process development aspects of the engagement. What that means is if the more reliant that it is on partners, the less scalable it is. And scalability is something that's really, really important in building an advisory services division, because if it's not able to be scaled, we're going to have a very small cap of the number of clients that can actually be taken on this journey of advisory services. So with all of those factors combined, the result is that clients ultimately aren't able to clearly see what the service delivery and milestones and tangible nature of the engagement actually is. And in some cases, it ends up being, well, an hour's meeting or a couple of hours meeting with the partner, but there's not a lot of structure to that conversation. And that's ultimately the results of that is that means with partners that are only able to deliver the service, it's not a scalable, repetitious, clear process. And we're not able to deliver on those milestones in a timely manner. What the result is that this can actually lead to a lack of profitability on those engagements, which the flow-on effect in some cases is that there is overcharging. So a partner might say, well, look, it took me 20 hours at my charge out rate of $400 an hour to actually deliver this engagement. But that's probably going to mean it's going to be double what someone else might be charging or my competitors might be charging on this engagement. So there's nothing wrong with charging that price on that engagement, but as long as it's not the result of a blowout in hours on the job, rather about value added. So when we put all of those things together, that is what creates this lack of client engagement into the advisory services model. And that also then starts driving the slowdown in the scaling and the building of the division. So hopefully, and as we're working through this, you might be seeing some of these things that say, well, gee, that might be me. Gee, that sounds like a bad scenario or something that might be quite demotivating for us as accountants and advisors. So let me now draw your attention to this next conversation about, well, how do we switch on what is an advisor-led model? What's Darren talking about? If I can really simplify it in a few quick points, an advisor-led approach really focuses on bringing clear process and structure to these areas of the high level areas like analysis, understanding what is the client's performance look like, exploring their financial information to identify things like growth inhibitors, things that might actually be problematic should they actually move into a high growth stage in their business journey. The planning aspect, a clear process around planning. How do we help the client put a plan together? It's a very broad and can be unstructured, but how do we really bring structure to that? And then finally, how do we put process around accountability? Do I need to call on my client weekly and be on their case about certain things? Well, absolutely not. There is a structure of accountability that we can build into this model. It also focuses on a structured sequence of outputs whilst also remaining agile. I think the agility part is a really important aspect. What we're talking about here is not a one size fits all model, but actually a model that will has worked for us across probably 80% of our clients. And the remaining 20% is small adjustments to the way that we might deliver this service. But ultimately, it is a structured sequence, and that sequence has real significance for us in how it ties into the promotion process. So I'll leave that for the moment. The other part is that it integrates technology. And I mentioned before that a client-led model might be more of a pass the software onto the client. Our approach has been the opposite. We've embedded it. We believe that it should be embedded in your service offering as an advisor and actually driven by the firm and not by the client. So Fathom for us has been a really important tool to allow that integration in a really efficient way. And it actually plays a role in a number of those sequences and those outputs that I mentioned. So the next part that I'd really like to help articulate is I thought of, again, something that we have a third of the room that says, well, I'm not really sure what an advisory service might be. Well, I really want to help you see what some of those components might be. And the first one is that it has one of the components in the crux of this service offering is that it's productized. So really by productizing, what we really mean is structuring or standardizing services with a clearly defined set of deliverables, clearly defined set of processes, and clearly defined pricing. So really organizing those services into something that has a tangible nature as opposed to just meeting with the client monthly to talk about how business is going. As I said before, it is something, one of the components is that it must be consistent. We do need to have consistent process, but still have that aspect of agility that means that we're not actually uh, pushing the client through an unnecessary amount of services, but adapting it to their needs, but still achieving what we need to actually lead them through this process. The next really important part that you would have to incorporate into your model if you were looking at building this, what I believe is something called what I call bite-size outputs. So a sequence of upfront, so one-off upfront bite-size outputs that are designed to create immediate engagement and immediate value with the client. That means we're not going to take 6 months to actually put different engagements together. We're going to bring the client into a value adding conversation very quickly. So once we have those upfront services or engagements completed, then we're ready to actually introduce the client into an ongoing recurring engagement, which is really focused on the accountability and the growth aspects of our engagement. So we're really trying to have those two. I think those two aspects almost have to be there. And of course, it is a buzzword at the moment. It's something that is a very, can be quite an intimidating idea, but fixed fee structure. By designing a fixed fee structure well enough that's robust enough, but still allowing what we call an outside of scope caveat that says, well, if there are unplanned things that we need to assist you with, of course, that's going to be an outside of scope based on a schedule of rates. But I think to give the client clarity and transparency about what's this all going to cost me, we do need to give them some degree of comfort about a fixed fee structure. And then finally, as I mentioned above, it needs to have one of the critical components is a technology platform integration. So that might not be just one system. It might be multiple tools along the way. But I think introducing the client to what I call the software, almost software as a service, it might be known across the IT world, software as a service, but actually integrating software into our service offering and using it for ourselves to deliver our services to the client, I think is a really important feature of this model. Okay, so you're probably thinking, well, okay, well, all these things are really nice and nice textbook type, points that Darren's making. What does it really look like? At the start, I mentioned that we're really happy to share our thoughts and our service offering in terms of how we actually have adapted to what we call this advisor-led model. So I'll take you through this process that we will typically use for, I would say, 90% of our clients. And this has been highly successful for us to really build valuable engagement with our clients. So the first aspect is, as I mentioned, we do need to have that upfront services component to how we deliver our services. So the first upfront project that we will typically do with our client is what we call a financial performance assessment. And that is a very simple, it's not a laborious process, but it's really designed to do two things. One, help us understand how has the business performed and are there any growth inhibitors that we need to identify that actually will really help us. We might need to rectify quite quickly with the client and things that would be a real problem if their growth really started to steamroll. It's also really important for the client to start seeing very quickly, perhaps, how do we see their business from an independent, unemotional point of view? So we look at 7 key aspects of financial performance, things like profitability, margin analysis, free cash flow analysis, a range of different areas that will really help us identify how the business has performed in the past. So once we know that, and we've taken the client through it, these are one-off projects that are on a fixed fee basis. We then take them into a strategic plan development stage. So now we know where they've come from. It's now a conversation about where is the business going in the next 18, 24 months, and what does the client really have as their goals the areas that they want to be accountable for. And we articulate that in a very simplified balanced scorecard format with action items, accountabilities, due dates, and owners for those initiatives. So you can see how we're building the conversation as we go. We've now talked about where they've come from. We're having the conversation about what direction are they going in. And now it's really important to bring in that important aspect of the budget. So it's really important to me that we don't build the budget in isolation of the strategic plan. So what we try and do in this phase is actually deliver or convert that strategic plan into the three-way budget. So we want to test the strategy for its financial viability. We may have a client that says, well, in order for us to grow, we need to invest in yellow goods of circa $1.5 million. Well, how are we going to fund that? What is the revenue growth need to be, and how quickly do we expect that revenue to build? These are questions that a disciplined or a structured conversation will tease out, because along all three of those engagements, we're actually really exploring the client's business in a way that is value adding for them, but also value adding for us, because we can be more informed about their business. So those are three upfront conversations. And by this stage, we've had no conversation about, the remaining, we're going to put you on a 12-month ongoing arrangement. We just want to get them through those three phases, because throughout that process, they get to know us in terms of what our capabilities are, but as importantly, we actually can build an understanding of, are they the right client for us? Because the reality is that there are clients that perhaps aren't right for our firm or for us for a range of reasons, and that's just the reality of the world. But it is an opportunity to really take them through that process. So finally, then, that is the point where we now talk about an ongoing services conversation. And that is where we deliver what we call our monthly board of management service. And in this board of management or bond process, we actually simply refer back to the documents that we did or prepared at the start. We look through a monthly financial performance assessment using the similar framework that we used in the FPA. We look at the strategic execution of the the strategic plan that we developed with the client. And we ask them questions like, well, you said that you were going to do these certain things. How are you going with those? Our due date's approaching. So it's a very simple accountability aspect. And finally, then the budget that we built in step 3 that we actually use for our monthly budget for actual performance. So as we progress through the year, we then get to May, and that is usually our opportunity to refresh that strategic plan. What aspects of our strategy has changed? And one of the things that we need to now incorporate, COVID is a fantastic example. It absolutely shook up most businesses' strategic plans, particularly for the coming 12 months. So really things change very quickly. And by having a default strategy that is locked in and not agile, the client can really come unstuck. And then finally in June, we then convert that updated strategic plan into a cash flow budget for the coming 12 months. So you can see here that this is a very simplified, it's not what I would see as rocket science. It's a very simple process of structured engagements, and the incorporation of Fathom for us has been really critical for this process. In fact, it's really improved the efficiency for us in delivering all of those areas that I've marked there with the Fathom logo. It's really helped us to become, as I said, more efficient. It's helped us to engage with our younger team and really help them understand and really build their capability around not only using technology, but actually applying it to a client circumstance. So you might be asking then the next little conversation, I'm just going to check my time here that we're okay. So you might be asking, we've got this fantastic planning. And again, it's very much it's nicely laid out with great colors and all those sort of things. And it would make sense to a client. But what we might actually need to think about is, how do we promote this? And what I've put there is a little axis there with client engagement. I think that managing client engagement along this process is absolutely critical to the success of an advisor led model. And so, what I mean by that is quite often it's the case where we may actually say to the client, well, okay, we finished your end of year tax work. And by the way, you've asked us about some big, helping you with some advisory services. So we've had a look at your situation, and what we're going to do is we're going to do an FPA. We're going to help you build a strategic plan. We're going to convert that into a budget, and then we're going to meet with you each month, and we're going to help you keep you accountable on that strategy and that budget. And then each year we're going to update that strategy. And by the way, that's going to cost you $40,000. And disclaimer, that's not actually what the services cost. I'm just using that as an example. But at that point, the client would be very much freaked out and overwhelmed with, hey, we were just spending $10,000 on our compliance work. And now all of a sudden you're asking us to spend another 40. How does that work? So the way to manage client engagement levels along this process is that is why we have the upfront services, because initially we have a very simple, relaxed conversation about just the financial performance that we see. We use Fathom to communicate that in a visual way, and we really manage the clients. We just focus their attention on here's the things that we can see, and these are the things that we may want to think about improving. So we get an initial uplift in engagement. We've now had a conversation, possibly 2 weeks after we've just met them, but we're not overwhelming them at the moment. We've just said we're going to deliver that project. The next area we now take them into the strategic plan discussion. Well, now they're getting to know us a little bit better. They understand that we're not just being counters who are going to tell them to cut their overheads and improve their gross margin. We're actually helping them articulate how they go about doing that. What are the action items that we need to think about? So now we've got by the first 2 engagements, we've got a client who understands a little bit more about their business. They also understand how they can fix it and improve. And now finally, then we introduce that cash flow budget and as that third upfront piece. And that is now where they said, well, we understand where we've come from. We have a clear view of where we're going and the action items around that. And now I can also take a budget, import that into my Xero file, and I've actually got something I can work with. So that is the first 3 phases that are all designed to build momentum with the client without getting them to commit, in a sense, to 40,000 year-long engagement that they may not actually want to continue with. So we don't require that the client commits to any of that. We actually say to them, you only ask us to do the FPA. When we've finished, then you can instruct us to go to the strategic plan. And really the client is quite often talking about, well, what's next once we finish those engagements? And that is when the client is at the highest sort of levels of engagement, we introduce that ongoing services implementation and that bond process. So it's really designed, had we introduced that ongoing services conversation at the start, we may have overwhelmed the client, and we've actually got to lead them through this process in a way that actually builds credibility and engagement along the way. So what we've found, and just to manage time, what we've found is that, as I said, as we've worked through and implemented these services, we actually have found that this has been a real catalyst for us to build not just the advisory services component of our firm, but the other areas as well. So the linkages to other services, and I think this is where it's such a value add for a practice, is that it actually drives tax and compliance services. So not just the traditional year-end services, but when the client is now engaged and growing and ideally starting to see improvement in their business, that gives way to things like restructures. They might not be in the right structure, and that's just not fit to bring on shareholders, for example. They might be finding that their tax bill is getting out of control and really damaging cash flow. So we might actually introduce additional or more frequent tax planning. The next aspect of our firm that we've found is that it's driven bookkeeping revenue. So we've had, obviously, we all know about the term, garbage in, garbage out. So it's really important if we're seeing that the client's accounts aren't clean and tidy, we've been able to really introduce a management accounting solution in-house and really help the client with things like cash flow management as a service, zero file migration. These are all secondary areas or projects that it's created for us. As Shay would have mentioned, I'm a valuation specialist for the Institute. And that is also, as the client's now growing, engaged, and working with us on a frequent basis, we're finding that there is a growth in valuation services required. We have clients that might be buying or selling businesses and therefore need that M&A advice support. We also have things like, very topical at the moment, reading about banks asking for advisors and accountants to provide supporting information to the bank so that they can de-risk on their side, but we can really help clients who might be looking to finance their growth, really help them understand what their borrowing capacity is, but then also help them construct that application in an efficient manner and put all the information together that they need to have a really efficient response period. So that's just an example of how the secondary services have grown as a result of engaging the client at this sort of level across these key areas. So really then, just to jump through the final aspect of what I wanted to share with you today, and just check my time. I think we're still okay. There are some really strong implementation success factors. And in preparing for today and sharing these thoughts, I really felt, what are the key areas that I've observed that perhaps we've gone through some of the hurdles, but also that maybe we've observed some of the other practices out there might be struggling with, the things that are barriers to success. The first one is really that this model really requires partner level ownership. And the advisory services is not something that can be passed on to the tech savvy juniors. And that's where the compulsion to just pass on software actually comes from, that we can get one of our juniors to come out and implement the software. It has to come from the partners. So as a partner, a community of partners in accounting firms, we really have to decide, well, it's going to start with me. We're going to build a strategy and we're going to really commit to this and drive the team. Because that leads into our second success factor, that right people and right culture, surprise, surprise, makes a significant difference in the outcomes of implementation. There are, what preemptively assessing is a question we may get to, is that, well, not all of my team actually would probably have the capability or the confidence to actually go and deliver this service. And you're probably right. There is some team members will naturally gravitate towards this sort of offering, and some might really not be comfortable in this space, and that's okay. The most important thing is that actually championing a culture of having a go is really important. Encouraging the team to role play and have conversations. We do it quite often with our team where we'll sit down and ask our team to tell me what you see here in this financial performance assessment. How would you assess this client? And almost role play with them on some of these outputs. And it's a fantastic way to really help them have a go and really build their capability. As I said above, the number one area in terms of the promotion is about overwhelming the client and overselling and really introducing too much too soon with the client. And we absolutely do not want to be misleading in the way that we lead them through this process. We want to be clear. We want to actually communicate how that process works and what's involved with the ongoing work. But we want to just really park that conversation of ongoing services and encourage the client to just work with us on those 3 upfront projects before we move into that ongoing conversation. So then finally, that the other really strong success factor that I think is that as a partner community, we really need to invest in capacity and invest in the resources that we need to actually implement this sort of service offering, because it is it is really unrealistic to think that you could cram this type of service offering or service development into the current capacity of, say, your tax and compliance services team. It is really important that you invest and create the capacity, but also how we have the conversation around write-offs. In a sense, we sort of, tongue in cheek say, well, really write-offs are almost an investment. Write-offs that relate to the delivery and development of this sort of service, not an expense, because actually you would have learned something, you would have had a go, and actually probably 9 times out of 10, the client actually would have found that you've had a valuable conversation with them. So we really, really try and avoid that conversation about, well, your write-offs are too high on this project. Within reason, we obviously have to make sure that it's economically viable, but we really try and make sure that we have that culture. So I think we're nicely on time I really wanted to open up some additional time for the Q&A on this session. I'm really happy to answer some questions, but also, as I said, there'll be some next steps about perhaps getting in contact with myself, but also Tom Bilton from Fathom, who's also going to be available at the hub after this session. So Shay, I'm really happy to, if that's okay, move to some Q&A time.
Awesome. Thanks, Darren. And just really, really quickly before we do that, I just want to, I guess, say, I don't know if this is on behalf of myself or just everybody, but I'm just overwhelmed with your generosity in sharing your knowledge here. Generally speaking, I think all of our clients need to be, receiving more advisory services. And I know that's very sort of, that's a boxed up phrase that we hear all the time, but particularly small businesses. And so it is important that all of us in the industry are doing this better. So I just want to thank you for being really generous with your expertise. Questions. There's quite a few, so I'll try and read them quickly. So where does building a relationship and gaining trust to deliver extra benefits fit into the development of an advisor-led advisory, and how do you commence to build that relationship?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think if I could draw your attention back to how that's the purpose behind those upfront services, is that they are bite-sized in nature. So they aren't massive projects that, from a cost point of view, are going to blow the client out of the water. They are simple engagements that really help to build that relationship. So as an example, you may get to the end of your preparation of financial statements. Clients reflecting genuine accounting losses for the year. And it would be a matter of saying to the client, well, look, to help you this year, what we really like to do is we've implemented a new process called financial performance assessment. And we'd really like to just have an hour of your time to sit down and talk to you about some of the observations, things that we can see that we think are probably need to be addressed in your business. We want to share with you those thoughts and give you some takeaways as part of your end of year work. Now that's a really simple conversation to have with the client. I haven't met too many clients that would be skeptical of that. Obviously, talking about costs, there are different ways to price this sort of services. And I've intentionally left out pricing for the moment because for lack of time, but I'm more than happy to have some conversations and discussions later about that.
Awesome. So our next question, I noticed your firm has deliberately separated the different service offerings, advisory, accounting, bookkeeping. Can you share the thought process around this?
Yeah, so we really wanted to distinguish ourselves. As I said, we started our Enterprise Elements brand with no traditional tax and compliance clients. We really wanted to position ourselves as a boutique service provider in that brand and in that area. What we found over time is that actually there was such strong demand for, clients having these conversations. We're seeing we couldn't really refer to bookkeepers that we found we could get consistency with. And so we thought, well, look, we really wanted to launch our bookkeeping business, but we didn't want to water down and have the perception in the marketplace of being a jack of all trades and trying to be everything to everyone. So we really set about building 3 specialist organizations within our group to really In our case, we actually have, in some cases, 3 individuals from our firm delivering different services to the clients. So it is quite unique.
Awesome. So, this question, our partners all like to do things their own way. So, we have 10 different processes. Yeah, I've heard this story before. If structure, consistency, and so scalability is critical, how successful will we be if we can't agree on the process?
That's a fantastic question. And ultimately, it does fall back to this is why my point. The first success factor is about partner level leadership. I have absolutely seen that issue where, and this is why advisory services have, in a sense, failed in some practices, is because we've got 10 different ways of doing 10 different things. It may be 10 different processes around delivering a financial performance assessment, and ultimately, it's not profitable and it's not something that we can scale to younger team members. So again, we shipwrecked the advisory services department. So to be perfectly honest, I think it's something that partners, and I'm assuming there's, quite a few partners in this community of participants today. It is actually up to us to really start taking this on in order to future proof the practice, because I think my observation is young, great talent can actually be lost by not actually moving to a consistent delivery process. So definitely means having a humble conversation amongst the partner base about how we're going to actually deliver this for our team.
Awesome. I hate to do this, and just for everyone's context, Darren and I have only just met, but I think we're going to be great friends, and we could literally talk about this all day. But we have run out of time. I'm so sorry. I want to thank Darren so much, as I said, for your generous sharing of some awesome expertise, and I just love all your thoughts around, structure and scale and all of those things, getting some real help out to our business clients, which I think is it's really really important. So. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Really looking forward to seeing you in some of the later sessions.
So thank you very much. And as I said, more than happy for you to get in contact with us to talk a little bit about some of the training we can help you with. So, but didn't want to make this about a plug. So please feel free to get in contact.
Thanks so much, Darren. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.